Broadcasting from the Washington Hilton in Washington, D.C., Solutions Review is on location at Boomi World 2019. Brought to you by Dell Boomi.
We are here at the Boomi World 2019 Expo Hall in the community zone, actually. I'm Doug Atkinson for Solutions Review, and I am lucky to be joined by Myles Suer, who is the
head of global enterprise marketing, but I also have another role, which is the facilitator for the CIO chat, and I have a column in CIO magazine as a result.
Well, and ultimately, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, you're clearly a well-placed executive here at Boomi, but I think what's interesting for our conversation right now is the topic of digital transformation. But I say that in a way to color it because you just wrote a review of a book by Jeannie Ross around how to think about digital transformation,
right?
And really thinking of it at a more holistic level.
Right, I agree.
And so tell me a little bit about kind of what you took away from that, because you just put it in CIO magazine a week or so ago.
Yeah, I mean, Jeannie is talking, and it kind of puts together a lot of the issues that are out there. Obviously, for a long time, and she spends some time in the book talking about digitization versus being a digital business. So digitization means I go and take my analog processes and I make them digital. And it's great to do order entry and things like that. However, creating a digital business means you're changing the value of the business. So it's not about taking cost out, it's about how do I fundamentally change my relationship with my customers or turn data into something that's valuable. And so Jeannie Ross's new book talks about a roadmap for legacy businesses who are trying to win against digital disruptors. How does that all happen?
Well, and I caveat the whole thing at the beginning around digital transformation because that might be the most overused term on the planet right now. And I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think it really is important for people to take a step back and say, what am I trying to do? I mean, I can leverage all this great technology, and there's a lot of it.
Right.
And there are all these great partners that can help me implement it. But in the end, what am I trying to get? Where am I trying to go with it? And ultimately, how is that going to not only build value for the business, but how's it going to impact the customer? And then what can I do with that data at that customer level to really improve that experience for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when you flip the equation and you say, okay, I have this technology and I can rethink how I do things for a customer, rethink how I add value to the business, it really kind of transforms the game. So, digital businesses are really about transforming the experience that a customer has. And I'll give you a really interesting example. So DBS Bank, which is in Singapore, and I recently got to meet with their head of our enterprise architecture, decided that it wanted to take some of the things that it has and turn it into an API, something that Boomi helps people do. And one of the things they did is they took their ATM application and turned that into an API. And then another company came along, a partner, and said, well, we could do something cool with that. And the cool thing they created an app so you can walk into a convenience store. So imagine 7-Eleven in our world. Sure. You walk into 7-Eleven, instead of having to go into the bank, you can pull cash out of the cash register and put it into your wallet. I mean, that's an example of a digital product that didn't exist before in this new world, and they didn't even create it. They exposed their APIs to partners who said, I can do something creative to change customers' lives.
Well, and ultimately that's the reason why, right? Is that at the end you're adding significant value to the customer at a transactional level that they never were able to realize.
And one of the big messages that Jeannie has in her new book is she talks about what she calls the operational backbone. And she talks about the fact that 10 years ago she wrote another book and said you need to put this thing in. So this is how you build applications, and this is how you connect them. This is how you create master data and fix your data quality, all those things. And she's got a warning to legacy businesses which have increasingly a shorter lifespan. This is table stakes. What you need to be doing is to have this part done and now be exposing the API so you can create these digital offerings or products. And so, the new businesses don't have all this legacy stack that's out there, as I just did with a Disruptors panel.
Exactly.
They don't have that all, and so they're able to jump right to building a digital business. Now, the legacy businesses who figure out how to quickly fix this have an advantage against the legacy business because they have all this data. But that data has to be good, and they have to turn that into offerings for customers. And so that's really what her book is about. Now, there's a lot of stuff out there now talking about low-code business process layers. And so Jeannie is espousing that, but the really big question out there is how do you do it? So Boomi, for example, has something we call Flow. And Flow is really, in my mind, how you build these digital products, because it's built upon the integration and APIs that Boomi has. And so what it means is that I'm not creating a bunch of tech debt that suddenly I have to watch out for. So in the CIO chat, we've talked about, hey, look, if you allow all these people to build all these apps and now you have to service it, the CIO is going to spend all their time doing it. So you need a platform that allows you to do all of this.
Well, and so the CIO chat, I wanted to get to that as well.
Sure.
Because I think that's a really interesting element that you bring to the table. And one of the things that we're trying to get everybody who sits in our hot seat here to talk about is what are some of the pitfalls that people can avoid as they are moving to this digital transformation. So there's all kinds of upside, and there's all kinds of advice as to the positives, but there are things that people should be looking out for. What would be a good example that you hear in that chat level that you would suggest?
So Deloitte's kind of created this model for the future of the CIO. Historically, CIOs were kind of order takers. They were a utility. And what Deloitte is saying is there's still a bunch that are still doing that. But what CIOs need to move to is either business, model co-creators or change instigators. And so when I've talked to CIOs, they believe that the longevity of the CIO is small if you consist of just, I'm going to take the orders and I'll do a good job at delivering on them. Today, CIOs understand the implication of the technology. They need to become more than somebody who's aligned, which has been in the literature forever, as you probably know. They have to become somebody who is actively involved in helping the business rethink its business models to take advantage of technology and win against competitors. And it was interesting, in this Disruptors panel, the Disruptors are all saying, we have this tension. Our leadership is constantly probing, have you learned something new? Should we do this? Should we change this? Should we do this? And that's the kind of thing that what CIOs need. They need to know, according to the CIO chat of CIOs, they need to know that their CEO gets it, that there's always somebody trying to eat their lunch.
And so that's another piece that I think is pivotal, and that is total buy-in from the top on down, right? So a CIO can stand on his desk and say, or her desk, and say whatever they'd like. But if there's not a cultural buy-in all the way down the line,
right,
it's really not a transformation at all.
Well, that's right. And it's interesting. I had a professor in graduate school who talked about how the seeds of failure are born in every success. And so you have to fight to not let that happen. And, I worked for a company several years ago called Adaptec. When I went to work there, they were a $2 billion company. When they sold for less than $100 million. Their sales were down to $50 million, and they're now no longer referenced. What did they do? They did SCSI, but they didn't see the change coming, or actually, in their case, they refused to see the change coming.
That's right, and that's a subtle but important difference. It's like some people can see it coming, but if the whole hierarchy doesn't get on the same page, it's not really happening. the change is not going to happen properly.
Well, and we had a women's panel today here, but it's very, very interesting. A lot of CIOs, including men, have said to me that a woman is a better CIO today than a man. And you go, well, why is that? Well, women are better at networking together the organization, and that's part of the big role. You not only need to have a vision, but you need to be able to put people together, and obviously there's plenty of men who can do that too, but there are a lot of men who aren't good at that.
That's right.
That kind of a CIO or CTO is not going to succeed in this world.
Yeah, and there needs to be a consensus, and then there needs to be a full level commitment,
right,
to make that happen. And it's a rocky road for a legacy business.
It is. It's absolutely. But you know what CIOs tell me over and over again: if you can get the people and process stuff done first, then even the hardest technologies problems can be solved. But if you try to solve it by starting with technology, you're going to have a loser.
Right. Coming from a technology marketing person.
Well, I always state the obvious. I mean, you have to start with people and process and fix it. And when you've got the attitude that you're going to fix it, then a lot of things become easier if everybody's in consensus. But it's interesting. I did an interview of the American Cancer Society CIO a couple months back, and one of the things he said to me that will always be in my thinking is, he said, even where you have consensus about you need to transform from the top to the bottom of the organization, when you do a change, you're changing somebody's life. So you want to make sure everybody's behind it, and you don't want to have what was framed a few years ago as a Kodak moment happen, where the top knew, maybe the very bottom knew, but the middle didn't want to come along.
And where's Kodak today?
I know.
Outstanding. Well, thanks for swinging by. This is great. I appreciate the time and always the insight, because in the end, it's a technology conference, and we love to talk about the technology, but I think what's most important is really understanding how to get to where you ultimately want to go, and that's, in the end, I think, a people process as much as it is a technology process.
Well, and it was interesting. A moment of pride for me this last year was helping to shape the message of Boomi, because we had all this great stuff, but we didn't shape it around the speed of transformation. And that's really where the opportunity is. So when I have a conversation with somebody, I say, can you afford not to do Boomi?
Right. Well, and that's a conversation that's happening all over the place right now. I mean, there are seriously gut check moments where companies have to recognize that it's either change or become Kodak.
Right. That's exactly where we're at.
Well, excellent. Myles, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for swinging by, and thanks for being part of a great show.
Thank you.